Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled you're joining us today because, well, we have a truly fascinating analysis ahead of us. We're going to be unpacking a really profound theological text that wrestles with some massive, heavy-hitting questions. Questions about finding purpose and, honestly, more importantly, finding silence in our incredibly chaotic modern era. If you've ever felt just completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information surrounding you every single day, this analysis is going to be absolutely crucial for you. Along the way, we'll even look at a real-world application of these concepts, a really powerful testimony from the bustling, highly prosperous nation of Singapore. So let's just jump right in and break this text down step by step to uncover its core message.
Okay, let's dive into this. The source material opens with a very grounded, instantly recognizable reality. It boldly states, we are living in a very noisy world with many voices clamoring for our attention. And it brings this right up to the present second by specifically calling out artificial intelligence. The point is made that today, literally anyone can produce their own songs, stories, and even sermons with just a few clicks on a keyboard. It's a really striking place to start, isn't it? It immediately asks us to recognize the unprecedented, frankly exhausting volume of noise we are currently swimming in.
So that brings us to Section 1, the noisy modern world.
Here, the text lays out a core critique regarding a society consumed by pride, greed, and lust. And you know, this isn't just about acoustic noise, it's about a deep spiritual and cultural noise. We're presented with this vital dichotomy. On one side, we have the clamor of the world, all that pride, greed, lust, and yes, AI-generated noise we just talked about. But on the other side is the whisper of God, which is characterized by silence and what the author calls mustard seed acts of kindness. The core argument here is that intentionally practicing silence is what draws our attention back to God's loving whispers, which are just so easily drowned out by everyday earthly players. Basically, it's a call to tune out the clamor so you can actually hear the whisper.
Which leads us to Section 2, Voice in the Wilderness.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it introduces the core biblical foundation holding up this entire argument. It quotes John 1:23, where John the Baptist says, "I am a voice shouting in the wilderness, clear the way for the Lord's coming." The author uses this ancient declaration to issue a very modern challenge. The text argues that the challenge for believers today is to be exactly this kind of shouting voice, but specifically during times of suffering. It frames this wilderness not just as a physical desert, but as the very real, painful realities of the human experience.
Now, if that sounds like an impossibly tall order, a strong reassurance is quickly offered by referencing Zechariah 4:10, "Do not despise small beginnings." It's a beautiful assertion. Actually, you don't need a megaphone to be that shouting voice. Not at all. Instead, small, mustard seed acts of kindness, directed toward those who are in pain and poverty, are, in fact, the shouts of a compassionate God. It's those tiny, faithful acts of kindness that actually cut through the world's noise.
Moving right along to Section 3, the power of humility.
So we're shifting from those outward actions, the acts of kindness, to the internal spiritual posture required to win the world for Christ. The text details some very specific attitudes here. It notes that winning the world requires a humble spirit, referencing Matthew 5:5, that the meek will inherit the earth. The role of the believer is to prepare the way for Jesus by drawing attention to the deep hunger and thirst for God's love during our current times of spiritual famine. The overarching idea is that lifting up Jesus during this famine will naturally draw everyone to him. So the crucial point is this paradox that emerges from John 3:30. As Christ becomes greater, we grow less and less in importance. It is a truly profound teaching. Decreasing our personal importance, setting our own egos completely aside in humility, is actually the precise mechanism that allows the core message of God's love to be magnified in the lives of others. It's about becoming a clear lens for the light to shine through, rather than trying to be the focal point yourself.
That brings us to Section 4, Rejecting Fast Buck Religion.
This is where the sharpest, most direct critique of certain modern religious practices comes into play. Using a translation of 1 Timothy 6:5, the text issues a stark, neutral warning about an epidemic of backstabbing and distortions of the truth when religion become a way to make a fast buck. It argues that believers are absolutely not called to sell the gospel in exchange for promises of health, wealth, and longevity. To ground this, the source material highlights a really powerful testimony of being a voice in the wilderness right in the highly prosperous modern nation of Singapore. It shows just how easy it is in a wealthy, successful society to accidentally start treating faith as a transaction for health and wealth, rather than a much deeper, self-sacrificial spiritual calling.
So a very stark contrast is drawn for us.
On one side, we have selling the gospel. This is a prosperity-driven faith, entirely focused on seeking physical health, material wealth, and a long life. On the other side is the true gospel, and notice how radically different it is. The true gospel, according to the author, is about the reality of living in a dark, broken world filled with pain and sorrow, but doing so sustained entirely by God's amazing grace. It completely rejects the idea that faith is some easy ticket out of hardship.
And finally, Section 5, A Voice of Testimony. Having dismantled the idea of a prosperity gospel, the focus pivots to how one should actually actively live out this calling. And this brilliantly illustrates a specific three-step progression based directly on Philippians 3:10-11. Step 1, know Him by suffering with Him. Step 2, share in His death. And only then, Step 3, experience the power of the resurrection. It's a tough pill to swallow, but true followers are challenged to know Christ through shared suffering, not by trying to avoid it at all costs.
To actually accomplish this, two essential dependencies are highlighted. First, believers are called to be a voice of testimony by being faithful witnesses of the Spirit's work in their lives, just as noted in Acts 1:8. Second, and this is absolutely key, they must rely on the Holy Spirit rather than human effort. Citing Zechariah 4:6, the point is emphasized that the kingdom of heaven comes to earth solely through the Holy Spirit. It literally cannot be manufactured by our own worldly wisdom, our striving, or our own two hands.
As the source text draws to a close, all of these massive theological concepts are summarized into a really beautiful rhythmic poem. It begins like this: shouting in the world, a voice in the wilderness, to turn back to God. It's such a striking reminder of the fundamental mission, isn't it? Cutting through the absolute noise of the world to call people back to their Creator.
The poetic summary continues, a humble spirit, a voice to prepare the way for the Messiah. Again, we see that intimate, unbreakable connection between the internal requirement of genuine humility with the external action of preparation. You simply cannot be the voice preparing the way without that deep, foundational humility. And the poem finishes with this: to live with God's grace, a voice of testimony, in pain and sorrow. This perfectly encapsulates the grounding themes of the whole text. It leaves no illusion about the reality of the world. There will be pain, for sure, and there will be sorrow. But amidst it all, the calling is to be a faithful voice of testimony, sustained entirely by grace.
The text concludes with a simple yet incredibly profound prayer. Lord, fill me with courage and wisdom to be your voice in the wilderness. And so I want to leave you with that exact thought, reframed as a question for your own personal reflection. Looking at the noise, the clamor, and the sorrow of the modern world, do you have the courage and wisdom to be a voice in the wilderness? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and I'll see you next time.